Hey everyone, this is Jay Stein, and this is the Intelligent Investor Chart of the Week series on the DevyRail YouTube channel, where each week we look at your favorite Dynasty assets and talk about whether it buy, sells, or holds. And this week we're going to do something a little different. We're going to look at the 2022 wide receiver class from a KTC chart basis, but we're going to look at them all in the same chart and see what that tells us from that class. So yeah, let's get to work. Yeah, so hey everyone, welcome back. Thank you for joining. So my process is about looking at KTC versus Fantasy points per game. And this series is specifically looking at KCT prices, those charts, and looking at them over time and what that could tell us about the future prices of these players. And KTC, of course, is KeepTradeCut. It's a website that uses crowdsourcing by asking the people that visit the site whether they keep, trade, or cut certain players. And they have a fancy algorithm that comes up with values for each one of these players. It's basically a sentiment indicator. And what I do is I take those KTC prices and chart them over time to start to paint a picture of what these players look like over time. So this week, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the KTC chart of the 2022 rookie wide receivers. And the thing what we're going to do is we're going to put them all in one chart, which I think is an interesting way to look at these things, because anybody can go to the KTC site and look at each one of these charts individually. But let's look at them all together into one chart. And excuse my chicken scratch on here. I know Kevin's definitely going to make fun of me for this, but these are all the wide receivers graphed on from a KTC basis. So, if you look at the key on the right-hand side, you can see that green line, that's Garrett Wilson. And if you take the very top line and sort of follow back all the way to the beginning, that green line, that's what Garrett Wilson's KTC will look like from last April into now. So yeah, a very interesting way to look at it. Here we got most of the 2022 wide receiver rookies here and their KTCs over that same time period. The purple band that kind of goes through the center there, that is the 2022 football season, so the regular season, so week 1 through week 18. And the white areas, those are the off season, right? So and then the dark purple line, that's the last color in the key there that kind of runs through the center. That is a benchmark of all of these wide receivers in one. So it's averaged all of these lines into one line. So you can kind of see how the wide receivers are moving together looking at that benchmark. You can see the purple line moves up a little bit through that purple band through the season. All these wide receivers on average were gaining in KTC price. So what do we got going on here with these numbers and these groupings and stuff like that? This is the kind of interesting part, and I thought that this was a little bit cool way to look at these wide receivers all together. So what I did was I grouped them into 3 buckets. So group 1, group 2, and group 3 on the left-hand side. That's when they started. That's when they first entered into the KTC database and how they were sort of grouped together from a KTC price basis. And then I grouped them together again in today's KTC prices. So that's the A, B, and C on the right-hand side. So we're going to talk about some of the journeys that some of these wide receivers have had. So let's start with the groups. Group 1 that ended up ending the year in Group A. So that is Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, and Drake London. And you can sort of see the path that each one of these wide receivers has taken. Drake London starts out at the top, but ends up finishing at the bottom of those 3. But still, they're close enough to be grouped into the sort of same area. And then Garrett Wilson sort of starts out in the middle and ends up a lot higher than everybody else. And a lot of that has to do with sort of the finish to his season. But he was the last one to sort of peak up from a KTC basis. And Chris Olave had a huge run sort of in the middle, or early into the season, into the middle of the season, and then sort of leveled off and wasn't able to get above that. And maybe, a lot of this has to do with the offenses, the injuries, all that goes into this stuff. So again, it's a sentiment indicator. So those 3 wide receivers, Wilson, Olave, and London, look like they're in a really good position. They're certainly the top of this wide receiver class right now as we see it. and their NFL prospects look pretty good from here. And you're seeing those in their prices from a KTC basis. The next ones we're going to look at are the Jamison Williams and Treylon Burks line. So Jamison Williams is the gray line, and Treylon Burks is the dark blue line. Now, those both start in Group 1, and they end up finishing in Group B. So they weren't able to quite keep up with the Garrett Wilsons, the Chris Olaves, and the Drake Londons, but they didn't lose too much value, right? So there's still hope. There's still opportunity. You start at a very high level. You finish still at the top of this Group B finish. And you didn't lose too much from a KTC basis. So there is risk here, and we'll talk about how all these kind of shape up with some of the other groups. But they are in a decent position. We're not talking about Group C wide receivers here, but there is risk to those names, and their journeys were pretty flat through the year. Now we're going to talk about the Group 2s that end up in Group B. We got Christian Watson, George Pickens, and Jahan Dotson in that group. So they start in Group 2 and end in Group B. And it's interesting. So Pickens has a journey where he kind of tries to make a push up into that A group, but then ends up finishing in the B group. And then Dotson is pretty steady Eddie. There were times when he was pushing up high. There were times when he was a little bit lower, but he kind of finishes in the middle of the pack in that B group. And then you have Christian Watson's journey, which is, I think, really interesting because he starts at the top of Group 2, and then he goes on this really wild ride where he almost makes his way into Group C finish, but then has a huge turn of events where he outperforms and then goes to the very top of the Group B position. And we're going to dig in a little bit there from a relative basis about what happened there. But that's an interesting journey that Christian Watson had. But I would say all of these groups, these wide receivers in Group B, you got Jamison Williams, Christian Watson, Treylon Burks, George Pickens, Jahan Dotson, all these Group B wide receivers. They finished and have KTCs that are pretty positive, but there's lots of risk there. It hasn't quite shown to the level that you can see for Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, and Drake London, and the market is not valuing like those players yet. The next one we want to look at is Group 2 to Group C. And this is actually the big faller in this chart. This is Skyy Moore. If you look at the key, that is the highlighter pink line, starts in Group 2, makes a big run early, and through all of offseason last season is, kind of trying to push up into that Group 1 category. And then the season starts and he's not being used, and he falls to the point where him and Christian Watson were very close to each other at one point, and then he just sort of levels off. He never has that Christian Watson moment where he outperforms. He just levels off. So he had huge underperformance into early November and then sort of just levels off and finish in this middle of the C group. That is a huge loss in value. That was the relative one to not own of this group. From a max to a min, he was in the max around 4,300 range from a KTC basis, and the min was around 2,600 KTC. So in all, you probably lost around 1,750 KTC from holding Skyy Moore through this process. If you were unfortunate enough to hold him, and I definitely had a few shares of Skyy Moore myself, so I'm feeling with you on that one. And then the last bucket we'll talk about here is the Group 3s to finish in Group C. That is your Wayndale Robinson, Alec Pierce, Romeo Doubs, David Bell. And what's interesting is the path that each one of these guys took to get there. Romeo Doubs had the most appreciation. You can see him fall, starting at the very low level in Group 3, and then his journey all the way up, almost pushing into a Group B finish at one point. But as you can see, there's sort of like these slopes here, these ups and downs for these players. Look, where all three of them, you had first Romeo Doubs, then Alec Pierce, and then Wayndale Robinson, all try and push up into that Group B finish, but subsequently all falling down and finishing sort of all in the same area in the Group C. And finally, I'll talk about David Bell, who started at the very top of Group 3, wasn't priced high enough to get into that Group 2 status, but very top of Group 3 and finishes at the very bottom of Group C. That is another sort of underperformer through this thing. And I wanted to call out two specific lines. So the Christian Watson and the Skyy Moore, that is like a fascinating one to me. And so one way to look at that is in early November, where the two charts sort of kind of diverge, where Christian Watson gets on the field, starts performing, and he outperforms substantially here. So let's take a look at these two charts from a relative perspective. So let's look at first Skyy Moore. So this is Skyy Moore on a relative to the 2022 rookie wide receiver benchmark. So that's that solid purple line. So what we're talking about relative, if that purple line's moving up, you want Skyy Moore's price chart to move up with it. So if it's moving flat, you'd want Skyy Moore to move flat with it. And that'd be sort of treading water. Outperformance would be if it's moving up and Skyy Moore moves up higher than what the average benchmark line is moving. And you can see in this chart, basically at the start of the season, this downward sloping line basically until early November, mid-November, that is significant underperformance. And then he sort of held steady there. So he had his underperformance and then sort of held steady. And then the context to look at it from the other wide receivers perspective, this is Christian Watson's. So Christian Watson, he had that same run of underperformance, but then he was able to get on the field, start performing, and you see a massive shoot up in outperformance where his line's moving up faster by a lot than what the benchmark 2022 wide receiver room is doing. And then he sort of flatlines again. So at some point, it got to a point where he got all the way up as high as he could. So, very interesting from a relative basis to see how Christian Watson and Skyy Moore seasons ended up finishing, what groups they ended up finishing, whether that's B or C. So we'll go back to the original site and, what are we trying to say here? Well, first off, given how they performed and where they are priced, it looks like Group A, Wilson, Olave, and London, they look like great dynasty wide receivers. They look like they'll be successful NFL wide receivers, and that's the safe group. And you do have to pay up in price for those wide receivers, but those guys not only were able to show it on the field, they're being rewarded that from a KTC perspective, from a price perspective. For Group B, there's question marks. So this is Jameson Williams, Christian Watson, Treylon Burks, George Pickens, and Jahan Dotson. There's question marks there, but they're not priced poorly. So these guys, there's still hope. If they can show it on the field, I have no doubt that they'll be able to see some price appreciation from these guys because they still hold some of that value. But there is some uncertainty that you're not seeing from that you were, those guys that were able to get up into Group A, you weren't able to see that from these guys. So Group A's were able to prove it. They were able to show it and they were rewarded for that. Group B's, there is still some risk there, which I think is interesting, and watching their journeys with Jameson Williams and Treylon Burks kind of staying steady Eddie, and the other ones sort of moving up a bit to be in the finished Group B. And then Group C. What do we got to say about Group C? There's a lot of risk here in Group C. There's a lot of uncertainty. I personally actually have conviction in Wayndell Robinson. I think given what happened with the injuries and everything like that, I think he can make a push into that Group B, but there's a lot of risk here. There's certainly a lot of risk, and there's a lot of risk in all of these guys. Obviously, we talked about Skyy Moore and what happened there. Somebody that I have shares in and I think could work, but these are low probability events where they're priced right now. And then finally, the David Bell fall. I actually do think that David Bell should be priced closer to the rest of Group C, so he should make up some of the difference between where you're seeing the rest of Group C and where David Bell's Group C price is right now. I don't think that there should be that much of a gap, but honestly, it's not looking great right now for David Bell from a KTC perspective. The fall was tough. It's not a Skyy Moore fall, but it is a tough fall to the point where he's not costing very much at all from a KTC basis. So that's it. I don't know. It's pretty interesting stuff. I know you can go to KTC site and look at all these charts. I think it's what's interesting is having all those guys sort of on one chart and what the story tells. From Group 1 to Group A, how they start, how they finished, is pretty interesting. and getting these guys bucketed into different risk levels and potentials, and show a little bit of what you can think about for future dynasty prices and how you should think about these guys going forward. So yeah, that's it. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know who you want to see again next week, and please like, comment, and subscribe down below. And if you're not already, please consider joining up on the WRL Patreon. Great group of guys in there. I know you'll learn a lot if you join up. You can find me on Twitter @_Jason Stein. And we're going to have the Intelligent Investor series coming out here at the end of March on the Football Guys. So looking forward to getting that out there eventually. So thank you so much for watching, and see you again next week.